The master is a man with a plan I can understand. So sings a delusional talking desk lamp in the 1987 animated children's film The Brave Little Toaster. Now, this movie presents an interesting case. It's a classic, definitely, to a generation of kids, and it is a movie lovingly made by a team of animation legends who would all have major roles at Disney and at Pixar in the coming decades, but very weirdly, this movie is not available for streaming or for purchase anywhere in the United States, and I am unclear as to why that is. I definitely saw this movie one time as a child. I liked it just fine, and I have never thought about it again. I have absolutely no nostalgia for it. I wasn't expecting to love every single second of it, to find it beautiful and moving and profound and had so much to say about the tyranny of work, the oppression of modern life under late capitalism, but we'll get to all of that. Yes, I did love this movie. I mentioned to my wife Lacey that I had watched this movie and that I planned to make a video about it. Basically, when I said the phrase "the brave little toaster" to her, she frowned and she said, "Yeah, that movie's dark. That's not a movie you feel happy when you're watching." I was thinking a good companion piece to this movie is the Apple TV series Severance, or maybe even like season 2 of The American Office, when it was still a show about how office work is dehumanizing and depressing. But yeah, that's my read on The Brave Little Toaster. Reading some like fan retrospectives, it looks like this movie is in the canon of the kinds of kids movies I've talked about, of like just scary kids movies that freaked kids the hell out when they watched it growing up. And watching it now, I could totally see that. You know, the Peter Lorre lamp is scary as hell. The big magnet crushing thing at the end of the movie, scary as hell. But the history of this movie, in the early 1980s, the Walt Disney Company was in its absolute doldrums, low point of it in its long history in terms of making animation. In the early 80s, it purchased the rights to a novel called The Brave Little Toaster by Thomas Disch, and a young Disney animator named John Lasseter, he teamed up with producer Thomas Wilhite to pitch to Disney an adaptation of The Brave Little Toaster, and he wanted to use computer animation. John Lasseter, of course, would go on to be the main creative head of Pixar for decades. Apparently, in this pitch meeting with Disney's president, Ron Miller, he was so off-putting in his enthusiasm for computer animation that they fired him. They called him after the meeting and said, "You're fired." I would like to see what he did in this meeting to be so off-putting. Maybe he just wanted to give too many hugs. I don't know, but he left and went to join Lucasfilm, which of course would spin off its computer animation division, Pixar, and all that went on to happen. But Disney didn't want to move forward with computer animation at the time because it was too expensive. They thought there's no point in doing a computer animated movie if it costs as much as a traditional animated movie. We want to make a cheap movie out of The Brave Little Toaster. So what they did was they had financed the creation of an independent animation house called Hyperion Animation. And the project moved over to Hyperion with the producer, Thomas Wilhite, and a Disney animator named Jerry Rees. Jerry Rees was in this legendary Cal Arts class of animation that also included John Lasseter and included Brad Bird, Tim Burton, John Musker, Ron Clements, and Joe Ranft. And Joe Ranft and Jerry Rees are basically the main creative leads on The Brave Little Toaster. So this movie was financed by Disney and distributed by Disney, but Jerry Rees said they had no actual involvement in the production of it. And you can tell by watching it, this doesn't feel like a Disney movie at all. So Jerry Rees and Joe Ranft, they developed this movie. They storyboard it to adapt the novel. This was truly a movie driven by animation. I've talked before about how in the late 80s, Disney kind of adjusted its model in animation toward treating it more like live action movies. You bring in basically a Hollywood screenwriter, a live action Hollywood screenwriter to write a traditional script, and that's the basis for the movie, as opposed to the traditional method of letting animators storyboard the movies, and the story for the movie comes out of the storyboards. Right here, The Brave Little Toaster is very much in the traditional tradition, but it's why you get so many like delightful animated sequences, like the appliances stumbling upon this pond where they just watch frogs and fish and stuff, and they're just entranced. This is the kind of stuff you only get in storyboard driven movies, because the only point of sequences like this is how visually delightful they are. And this sequence is delightful. There are a million delightful sequences in this movie. My notes are 4 pages of just saying, I love this. I fucking love this. What is often noted about this movie especially because of the number of future Pixar people who are associated with it, is as many as similarities with the Toy Story movies. And I was ready to dismiss these similarities, say they're superficial, but I was surprised at just how many there are. There are so many, not just to Toy Story 1, but to all 4 Toy Story movies. I think that this might just be the approach that Pixar has to developing stories, of building rules for your world. If you take like an inanimate object and think, okay, this object basically has a soul, it has a personality, what would be the consequences of that, kind of lead to just similar story beats. But we see in The Brave Little Toaster, like they go to a repair shop who's owned by a guy who seems a lot like Al from Al's Toy Barn in Toy Story 2. They meet other mutilated appliances who seem like they are the ancestors of Sid's mutilated toys. And it's also kind of similar to the preschool from Toy Story 3. And then there's even a climax at a junkyard like Toy Story 3. I think it's just like you think, if we take inanimate objects and ask, what kinds of situations would they be in most peril, you're going to come up with sort of similar answers. I don't think it's the case of Pixar ripping itself off or recycling its old ideas. I think that it's the approach to world building where you ask questions about objects, like the blanket character is a child's blanket. And so he has like a child's personality, and he's designed to have physical nurturing contact with a child. So he just kind of like needs that nurturing in return. And that's the kind of stuff Pixar does when it builds its worlds too. The character personalities derive from the essential nature of what the objects are. So this is a relatively low budget movie, but I think it is gorgeous. I love all of the character designs, especially the blankets. I think it's so clever. I think that, like, you ask, how do you give a blanket a face? How do you give a blanket a personality? And it's like, you make it an electric blanket, and the little battery case, that's its head. There's so many clever touches like that all throughout the movie. John Lovitz plays a radio, and he speaks with a broadcaster's cadence, but his voice is also treated in the sound mix so that it sounds like it's coming from a speaker, so his voice just sounds like it's coming from a different source than the rest of the characters. I love that so much. I love that the characters travel around by sitting on an office chair that gets pulled by the vacuum cleaner. It's just it's so funny. The premise of the movie is that it involves these objects. But I think the key difference between this and Toy Story is that the objects here are basically functional. That's all they are. And there is no, the relationship that they have with their owner is completely one-sided. It's transactional for the owner. He uses them because he has utilitarian use for them, unlike toys where there is some reciprocity. Like a person who has toys may love the toys in a way that goes beyond function or utility. That's not so with the characters in this movie. Like, you're not going to feel about a toaster the way you feel about your toy. But the tragedy of the characters in this movie is they don't know that. They think that their master, who they always refer to as master, is a god basically, and sheds his benevolent love upon them. And they don't understand. The owner does not give a shit about them, doesn't even know that they exist or have souls or whatever. He has abandoned them because they are useless to him. And even at the end of the movie, when he reclaims them, it's not because he loves them, discovers that he loves them, or has even sentimental attachment to them, but realizes, I could take these things to my dorm room in college and they'll be useful to me there. They will eventually break, and he will throw them away without a second thought. That's why I started to read this movie as being about having a shitty job and about toxic work culture. These 5 characters, they worship their boss. They call him the master. They formed a cult around him in his absence. They get pleasure and personal satisfaction out of serving him. But when the movie starts, he's been gone for so long because they've been left at his family's vacation home. They have no understanding about how the world actually works, so they don't understand concepts like second homes. But their self-worth derives basically from their function, from how well they serve him. How well do they serve the master? How well does a toast heat up bread? How well does a lamp produce light? It's a cautionary tale, I think, about to all of us who get too much self-worth out of what we do for a living or the work we do, how productive we are, because eventually, one, our productivity will slow down. We won't be able to do the jobs we once did. And 2, our work can never actually love us back. Eventually we will be discarded by the companies we live for, by the masters we serve. We'll be put in an attic, we'll gather dust, or we'll be crushed and melted in a junkyard. But these characters don't understand that. And they also don't understand who their master is, because they leave the house on a quest to find their owner, and they go out into the world for the first time, and they sing this rousing song that extols the master's many virtues, because again, they're in a cult. And the things they say about him are just completely incorrect. They have no understanding of who this guy is. They say master is a man who lays his hand across the land. So like, the master they know was a child. They know nothing about him, but they work at a shitty company and have bought into the company's mission statement, or they believe it when the boss says we're like a family here. And that's why I think it's interesting to compare it to Toy Story, because there's sort of an inverse relationship between the objects and their owner from Brave Little Toaster to Toy Story. In Toy Story, the owner, Andy, can love the toys back, invests in them a sense of meaning that you wouldn't invest in, say, a toaster or a vacuum cleaner. He has sentimental attachment to these things, and so they mean more to him than just how well do they function to me? What utility do I get out of them? And from there, we just get a completely different relationship to work, because the characters in Toy Story understand the nature of the world that they live in. They understand that they are toys, where it's not even clear that the objects in the Brave Little Toaster understand that they're just appliances. Like, they know the word appliance, but they don't understand what that actually means. I find it notable that the people who made this movie, who made this more negative and dour outlook on work, were coming from Disney of the 1980s, of the early 1980s, where morale was extremely low, and animators like Don Bluth left the company because morale was so low. Toy Story, in contrast, which has a more optimistic view of work. Pixar was a much smaller company. It was nominally run by people who were animators and believed in the mission of making animation. In the Brave Little Toaster, which again was made on such a small budget, you can feel that they're so happy to be free of Disney, because they're allowed to break Disney rules. Like, the characters in this movie, they stretch and they squeeze, they go off model, they get extremely cartoony, and in a great way. I love how cartoony this movie can get. The other thing I found very surprisingly poignant about this movie is it capturing this moment in time where our relationship to appliances was changing. There was a time, younger viewers might find it hard to believe, there was a time where appliances, when they broke, rather than buying new ones, we repaired them rather than replace them. There were people whose job it was to repair appliances, even, yes, toasters and blenders and radios and lamps, where it actually made economic sense to get a lamp repaired rather than buy a cheap new lamp at Walmart. Now, already in 1987, this was changing, but I think that's why it's poignant, is to sort of capture this moment in time. And I think that when we finally meet the master, we realize he's a teenager. He's about to go off in college. Even he's like debating, like, why am I looking for all my old shit? I could just buy new stuff. But no, I have a perfectly good toaster. I don't need to buy a new one. Like, that's not even a conversation that we have anymore. And I think it's not a coincidence that this movie's made by animators who painstakingly work on every frame of animation and probably empathize with objects, with products that are a result of other tradespeople putting in a lot of hard work, and think it just sucks that we just, discard stuff. We stick it in the attic and forget about it forever. So yes, I love this movie. I wrote down 4 pages of notes of just gushing praise for this movie. I love it so much. I love how wonderful it looks. I love the imagination here. I love all the directions the story goes. I love the voice cast. Check this movie out. Of course, you cannot watch it in the United States on streaming. It's never been released on Blu-ray, but Jerry Rees did approve a 4K scan from a 35 millimeter print that looks really cool. That is on YouTube, so you can watch that for free. Just Google Brave Little Toaster 4K and you can watch it there.